Welcome, everybody. It's going to take us a couple minutes to get everyone in. I'm Aileen Cormier. I am the current president of New Hampshire IDA. We serve Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. The chat is active. So why don't you let us all know where you're logging in from? I live in New Hampshire. Our panelist tonight, Brenda, is from New Hampshire. Michael Patton lives in Massachusetts, as well as Carol. Oh, and here we have somebody from Texas. Wow. Welcome, Kim. Somebody from Florida. Well, it certainly is sunny in Florida, but it's pretty brisk here. Welcome, Anna. Here we have somebody from the Bay Area in California. Welcome, Lois. Here's somebody else from New Hampshire. Woohoo! Welcome. Somebody from Vermont. We do have
Melissa Farrell from Vermont.
Oh.
Yeah, I did talk to Melissa this afternoon.
Somebody else from New Hampshire. Someone else. Oh, here we got a bunch of people from New Hampshire. Oh, Tracy, how you doing?
Tracy.
Somebody else from New Hampshire. We got lots of people from New Hampshire. This is good. This is great. More New Hampshire peoples. Oh, hi, Amy. I see some names of people that I haven't seen in quite a while, which I don't like. We're all feeling a little isolated with the pandemic. So, for those of you that are just logging on, I'm Aileen. I'm the president of New Hampshire IDA at the moment, and we're so excited that we have Carol and Michael Patton with us tonight. They have both served as presidents of New Hampshire IDA in the past, and as a reminder, we serve Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. The chat is open, so if you want to tell us where you're logging in from, that's great. We've had people from all over. We had somebody from Florida, Texas, California, Vermont, New Hampshire, people from all over. Oops, somebody from Massachusetts. Here's somebody from Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Welcome. Another person from New Hampshire. This is great. Somebody from New Jersey. Welcome. Very good. So as you know, this is, somebody from Bow. We're really excited to be able to offer these webinars for parents. We know that that was one of the areas that we recognized that we just didn't feel that we had enough to offer for parents. We had a lot to offer for teachers with our with all of our lectures that we have done. So this is a new initiative that we've started this year. It was Brenda's great idea, where we're going to have every other month, we'll have these webinars for parents. So as I said, we've got Carol and Michael tonight on advocacy. In February, we're going to have Dr. Melissa Farrell and Sue Morby talking about assessments. In April, we'll have Beth McClure. Her topic is effective reading instruction for students with dyslexia. On June 9th, we have 3 guest speakers, Claudia Golda Dominguez, Marie Thibodeau, and Brittany Lovejoy on homeschooling. And then in August, we have Noelle Foy on dyslexia, stress, and anxiety, the anxiety connection. We have, just in case you're not aware of some of the benefits to IDA membership, it's a great way to connect with your community, with branch affiliation. We have Facebook book groups and an annual conference. It's a good way to stay informed. There's the Perspectives of Language journal and the Annals of Dyslexia. We have a newsletter that goes out a couple times a year that's just packed full of information. You will be able to soon see those on our website as well. There's great perks, there's online stores, there's conference recordings, and it's also a good opportunity to expand your network by the professional directory that we have. There's all different membership levels. And here's just the New Hampshire IDA branch. We have this Read for Parents. These are just things that we do. We have an annual conference every year. We collaborate with the Wilson, we with the Wilson training. We do an annual Project Read webinar. We have a bi-yearly newsletter, and we offer scholarships to teachers for our conferences. There are a lot of different levels of membership for as little as, well, $50 a year. But since we're in the midst of a pandemic, IDA is offering, see down at the bottom, a free membership to classroom teachers that just are applying for the first time. And Brenda will put the link for that in with the chat for how you can apply for the membership. But if you forget or don't copy it or don't photocopy it or don't take a picture of it, you can just go to the IDA website and you can find all that membership information. And without further ado, I believe we are about to introduce, to introduce Michael and Carol Patton. So Carol is a trained special education advocate assisting parents of students with all disabilities for more than 35 years. She's a paralegal and has advanced training in reading and written language methods of remediation. She's a member of the Orton Oaks. If you're not familiar with that, that means that she's been a member of IDA for eons, and is a past president of the New Hampshire branch, as well as a founding member and the first president of the New Hampshire branch of IDA. Carol is the parent of 3 adult college-educated children with dyslexia. She also has a keen interest in brain research around dyslexia and values the importance of special education case law. Michael Patton also is a past president of New Hampshire IDA. He is Westfield Electroplating Company's human resources professional with over 7 years of experience with this company. His professional goals are based on providing HR solutions for WEPCO's management and employees through team building, monitoring, federal and state regulatory compliances, and HR technology. Michael holds a bachelor's degree from St. Michael's College and a master's degree in reading and writing specialist from Simmons University. He holds New Hampshire's teacher's certification as a reading and writing specialist and as a special education teacher. Michael also holds a certification as a global career development facilitator and as an SHRM-CP. Michael is also an active member of the Society for Human Resource Management at the national and local level. He is also invested in sharing his knowledge and enjoys mentoring up and coming HR professionals. Michael enjoys spending time with his family, reading, and is an avid fan of the Boston Bruins, New England Patriots, and Boston Red Sox. Michael is married and has a 4-year-old daughter. So welcome, Michael and Carol. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we're really excited to hear your presentation.
Perfect, thank you. Well, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us this evening for advocacy in students with dyslexia in public schools. First, I wanted to thank you all for attending. I see in the live chat feature that we see some old friends and some new friends joining us tonight. Many have not seen in some time, but nevertheless, welcome. Well, I wouldn't have imagined that I would be presenting a webinar with my mom, Carol, but after all, it is 2020. And we're living in unprecedented times. So Carol and I have put together this PowerPoint as a reference for you all. And yes, before you ask, we'll make sure the PowerPoint is available for download on NHIDA's webpage, as well as all the answers to your questions if we don't get to them tonight. So we have a ton of information on these slides. And so we apologize up front that we're not going to be able to hit every single tidbit of information, but it will be there as a resource for you. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them throughout the PowerPoint or throughout the lecture here tonight, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. And if we don't get to them, we'll make sure that we have somebody from NHIDA or ourselves reach out to you or put it on the website. So we'll go to slide 1, Andrea, go ahead. So preparing to advocate, it all starts with you as the parent. You need to prepare yourself first. This journey is going to be a roller coaster ride full of emotions. those emotions are going to have major ups and downs. And it all goes without saying is you're going to be your child's best advocate. You need to empower yourself. In order to do that, you need to educate yourself in the laws, the procedures, the process, and obviously organize yourself. You need to remember that you are an equal team member in all of these meetings that you're going to, and that your input is valid and it is accepted. So you need to empower yourself to speak up when you have a question or a concern. Remember, schools are a business, and they're in the business of teaching children. And just like any business, resources are not unlimited. So the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So by aligning yourself and getting yourself educated, it allows you to speak up and be that voice of concern, because most case managers have dozens or even multiple cases going on. And so you're going to be that consistent person throughout the entire meeting or all of the meetings, because members will be coming in and coming out. Andrea, the next slide, please. So building knowledge and identifying resources, it's extremely helpful for you to understand and be knowledgeable of what dyslexia is. So later on, we will go over the specific definitions of dyslexia and specific learning disabilities. I can't tell you how many times I've heard in my career as a special education advocate, a teacher, and even as an administrator, that dyslexia doesn't exist or there's no such thing. So understanding the characteristics of dyslexia, understanding the strategies or effective structure of language, and the approaches that are used to remediate or teach children with dyslexia is hugely important for you as a parent to understand those characteristics of what dyslexia looks like, what a typical dyslexia or person with dyslexia has, so that you know when you're asking for a specific service or a specific time of remediation that you're hitting those characteristics. Because for some reason, dyslexia is taboo, or that word is taboo, where school districts just seem to shy around acknowledging its existence. So it's hugely important that if you know some of those pieces and parts of it, that you'll be able to get what you want in the end. If it's a specific approach, that you're able to ask the right questions or steer the conversation in that direction. But we'll go over that. Carol will take that on in a few minutes to help show some of those characteristics and give you an idea of an approach. And one thing that we did leave off the PowerPoint, and I apologize, is family history. I think that's a powerful piece of information, explaining to a team or members of a group that you have family history and that this isn't just a one-off, that typically in going back, that someone in the family tree has had dyslexia and it's continued to work its way through its branches. So I think it's hugely important for the team to understand if there's a history and advocating for that. This isn't just a mistake or something other than that. Andrea, the next slide. So getting organized, it's really important for you to organize yourself. Creating a resource book is a great way to inform yourself and constantly submerging yourself in the vocabulary and the topics. But there also should be a binder for your child. It doesn't need to be overly complex. A 3-inch 3-ring binder with individual tabs is a great start. Having an evaluation section, IEPs, progress notes, report cards, work samples, emails, meeting notes are all important pieces of things that you'll reference constantly. And it's important to have them in one meaningful spot. Being the record keeper is something that you can do to help the team and moreover, keep you up to date. And just like I referenced prior to, before is that schools are like that business, and with those resources, if you don't document it by putting it in writing, it typically didn't happen. So you definitely need to follow up with any verbal or any conversations that you have with districts or school or teacher members. Follow it up with an email. It's really easy to do, per our conversation earlier today, XYZ, and then have them respond back to it. And of course, save that documentation so that you have a record of those pieces and parts. Andrea, your next slide, or my next slide. Thanks. So understanding the system and supports of legal mandates in your child's school. Obviously, this is a little bit of a dense slide. There's a ton of information out there, such as response to intervention, dyslexia laws, Section 504, Individuals with Disabilities Act 2004, or IDEA, or reauthorization, the New Hampshire standards, of course, and the OSEP memo dated October 23rd of 2015. So bringing us back to our previous slide of preparing yourself, these should be in your binder or your resources. The most important one that are a few important ones that Carol and I have used for many years, of course, is the special education procedural safeguards. That's not on this slide, but we'll make sure that you have a copy of it on NHIDA website, but that's the specific procedural safeguards for the state of New Hampshire. Obviously, the New Hampshire dyslexia law, which Carol is going to go over in detail. The OSEP memo. This is a pretty important memo. This is dated back in 2015, where it specifically clarifies dyslexia under the specific learning disabilities under IDEA. And this is a good one to keep in mind or have an extra few copies, because of course, there's always going to be somebody on the team that has the audacity to say dyslexia is not a disability and it's not written in the regs. And I think that it's hugely powerful for a parent to embolden themselves to have a copy of that memo and hand it to the team to specifically show them that, yes, it is in the specific IDEA under specific learning disabilities. And here's the memo that specifically says it. And to be honest, it's hugely powerful. And if you can show that information, it will certainly put you at a higher standard on the team. So, of course, now it's time for me to pass you guys to Carol. She's going to go over the IDEA 2004 definitions and take us away, Carol.
Okay, so because we have a short amount of time, we're going to quickly go through these and you can look them up for yourself, but we want to be sure that you're aware of what they actually say. So the specific learning disability definition in the IDEA, and it also is a part of state regulations. State regulations have to at least have what is outlined or contained in the IDEA, and they can have further regulations if that state chooses to do that. New Hampshire does have in place what was originally part of the federal law before 2004. It was significantly amended in 2004. Some states adopted those regulations. Other states chose to keep what they had previously, which was significantly more extensive. But as you can see here, dyslexia is specifically listed as a part of a specific learning disability. And if you want to go to the next slide, Andrea. And we thought it was important to also provide the definition of dyslexia that was adopted in 2002 by the IDEA Board of Directors. And they very carefully chose their words. And it's important that you know that definition as well, because it will help guide you in knowing what, how to assess your child, what areas of assessment would be important to clarify the profile. We also through IDA have learned over time that 1 in 5 people are dyslexic, and the DSM-5, when it was released, did eliminate dyslexia as its own category, but it is now listed under specific reading disorder if that should come up for you. The next slide. Andrea, do you want to change to, okay. The special education cycle is fairly complex, but it's important, as Michael's indicated, that that you have a really good understanding of the components of it, because it will help you to get what your particular child needs to have, to have their needs met. Anybody can make a referral. Parents should put any referrals in writing and clarify the observations so that they're referring to the team's specific indicators of why their child should be evaluated. The school district has 15 days with which to meet with the parent. The team considers the child's profile. They can decide to do further assessment, or they can also decide they have enough information, which would be probably pretty rare, but they also can decide that they don't need to evaluate the child. So if they decide they're going to move ahead, they design a comprehensive list of tests. I think it's important that parents ask for the names of the tests. And if you look at just the fact sheets from IDA, you'll find that there's fact sheets that list the specific areas that would be important to evaluate. The parent has 14 days with which to sign for the evaluation. It's important to keep to the timelines. There's a really important parent responsibility. Once the permission is signed, the school district has 60 calendar days from the signature to do their evaluation and conduct the evaluation team meeting. They must provide the written reports to you 5 days prior to the meeting. And as we said, dyslexia is categorized under specific learning disability. Once they make a decision relative to eligibility, if the child's found eligible or not, the parent has 14 days to sign that paperwork. If the child is found eligible, the team has 30 days in which to develop an IEP. There's nothing in the regulations that say they need to provide you a copy of that in advance. But I always tell parents that they should, probably 10 days before the meeting, ask for a copy of the draft IEP so they have time to review it and come up with questions or any changes or amendments they're looking for.
I think that's hugely important, Carol, is asking for something in advance so that you have time to digest it. You are not educators. Most of you are working professionals. And Carol and I have worked with lawyers, attorneys, doctors who have specifically hired us to represent them, because the information, it's a totally different world than what you're used to. So asking for things in advance, giving you time to digest. By under no means do you have to sign anything that day, and take the time that you have to be able to digest that information. And like we said earlier in our previous slide, you do have a voice. You are part of this team. So even though you may not have an educational background, you do have a life background. So you are able to interject and add relevant information, regardless if you have an educational degree or not. So it's really take the time to understand and ask questions or receive things in prior notices, because it will help you feel better when you do meet as a group.
And just before we get off of this page, a lot of times when I'm looking for information or clarification or interpretation of the regulations, I tend to use the Rights Law website, and they have on their website a book. It's called All About Tests and Assessments, and it's written by Pete Wright, Pam Wright, and Melissa Farrell. So all the tests are listed in there. The book is a little bit older now, so some of the tests have been renormed and standardized. So you just have to be careful when you're looking at that to be sure you're looking at the right year that the test was developed. So do you want to go to the next one, Andrea?
So the special education cycle, Carol and I developed this slide. It just kind of gives you a good idea of the cycle of everything with independent evaluations. And we're only going to touch on this for a minute. Dr. Farrell next month is going to have a PowerPoint, which I encourage you all to attend. She's phenomenal and has written multiple books on the subject. But for independent evaluations, Carol can talk a little bit more in depth with this, but essentially those evaluations are a huge piece of this educational puzzle. It's the data, it's the information that you can use to advocate for specific needs or to determine if a child meets a criteria or can be identified. So what we wanted to talk about or highlight today from this is that these evaluations you're going to do with the school district, you can also get an independent evaluation. And based on our professional background and dealing and working with school districts, I think it's one of the most important pieces of things that you as a parent can provide for the school as you're advocating for your child, especially if you truly believe that your child needs to be identified. I know you're thinking, and I'm sure there's 40 people right now that are thinking, well, how much does that cost? And really to answer that, it doesn't matter, because the gamble is too large. If your child is denied the services that you think they need and they don't get the help that they desperately need, then they're never going to close the gap. And all the research that has come out over the last 25 years is if kids don't receive this intense, systematic, research-based instruction in structured language, they're going to continue to have that gap. It will not get closed. So I think if there was resources that a family needs to pull together, it is certainly going to be an independent evaluation with a non-biased, a sound evaluator who has dealt with hundreds of cases. And I know that that's something that some people would say, well, the school district's supposed to pay for that, or don't they have school psychologists? And they do, and most of them are very competent in being able to do certain pieces of it, but you just need a full, well-rounded, eval. And Carol, you can speak a little bit more to that. In your opinion on it.
Well, part of what this slide represents is that if a parent disagrees with the school district evaluation, aside from deciding to get your own, they do have the right to request an independent evaluation at public expense. And the school district can ask why. You don't have to provide a reason why if you don't choose to do so. And at that point, the school district has two choices. They can either provide the independent eval, or they can file for a due process hearing to show how their evaluation is appropriate and meets the needs of the student, and the scores that they got when they administered their evaluation are accurate. And so it is a bit of it creates somewhat of a conflict when parents ask for that, but it is their right to ask for it. One of the things is a word of caution is if you're going to get your own evaluation, you should probably check your district's website and see if they have a policy regarding that, because if you don't follow their policy, sometimes they don't have to accept it, or if you're making a request to pay for it, they wouldn't have to pay if you did not follow their criteria. It's not the same in every district, and it's not the same in every state. So, Andrea, you want to go to the next one?
So response to intervention, RTI, we could spend hours on this topic alone, but just a brief overview that it was developed in the, for the general ed setting, that it is an evidence-based screening tool to establish a baseline. And I think it's a good intention overall when it was originally developed by the feds. But as time, we have seen as advocates that districts have used it to avoid special education identification or special ed services. So there are technically 3 levels of RTI, level 1, 2, and 3. Schools do have the flexibility to adjust the intensity if needed, or, and they can track progress and provide additional resources or less resources depending on the student's individual needs. I want to really highlight here and remember or point out to you all is that RTI is not special ed services, and that it cannot, and I repeat, cannot deny a student the right to an evaluation or identification. It cannot stop the special ed process. So if you feel that the information that RTI is providing is not meeting the needs of the student, or you're not seeing growth, it's prudent that you start the special ed process and put it in writing that you'd like to meet, because I've heard and seen that schools will say, well, let's RTI try, let's get through this semester, let's get through this, and we'll see. And I'm on the rule of thumb is that if too much time is lost, that gap just gets harder and harder to close. So it should be really quick, and the proof will be in their evaluation, or sorry, their scores, and whether or not your child is meeting or exceeding the expectations of each tier level, and go from there.
I think it's important to, go ahead.
Sorry, at some point, I just wanted to break for a couple of questions, and I think this is a good time.
Okay, if I could just say before we move off of this, that most of the time, or what I have observed myself, is that they don't provide the parents a lot of information. They keep data, but they don't necessarily share the data, and you have to ask them.
Right.
You have to ask them very specifically what tier your child is working at. And I typically find that they don't bring them to tier 3, which is more either one other student or individual. They leave them in the small group on the tier 2.
Yeah, in my experience, I think I've seen similar things. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's trying to keep things in the general ed classroom. And I think the intention is very good, that they are using in some school districts scientifically research-based, good instruction, good techniques. And for some kids, it is what they need. But there's that small group, or that small percentage of kids that just need that more intense focus. Heidi, we're ready for some questions.
Okay, so what if the school is avoiding determination of eligibility? Well, this is all great if you have an IEP, but what if they're just avoiding that?
Well, you need to put your request in writing and outline what it is that you're observing with your child, and ask about the RTI, and exactly where the child is, so that you have that information. Additionally, kind of the next slide, we're going to talk about every state pretty much now has a dyslexia law, and I find that they haven't ever told the parents anything about doing a screening. I have not had one parent that I've talked to of a young child that was aware their child was screened. And unless I ask for that information, they don't provide it. And asking where your child falls within their classroom is another good piece of information. If they don't find the child eligible and you feel that they are, you can access the independent evaluation at public expense, or as Michael said, get your own evaluation. Get a good neuropsychological evaluation. A lot of insurance companies will pay for the neuropsych part. They will not pay for academic parts of a neuropsych eval. You would have to pay for that yourself.
So it's really
But
putting
it's definitely
anybody,
worth it.
so putting people on notice, obviously writing a formal letter, sending a certified mail. And you don't know, I mean, I don't know what each individual person has with their school district, but some things, yeah, Carol's right, become adversarial, and other things, it's part of, the principal, the special educator, and certainly sending them a letter stating that you want to meet for the intent of identification or moving to that process is the best course of action. A letter puts everybody in documentation that you are meaning business, I guess, at this point.
And then someone else said, does the school system have to accept the independent evaluation? My son was just evaluated by a professional neuropsych, and we are now going back to the school with it.
Great question. Carol, you can jump in, but
Yeah,
it's
they don't
complicated.
have to accept it, but it's very rare that they don't. They often will review it and they will use it to identify a student. If the place, the evaluation was obtained is reputable, which most of them are. And where I find it falls short is that they tend to use it for the evaluation process and then they put it in the back of the file and they don't want to use it to write the IEP.
Yeah, and I think that's strong to note that like I had said, it's complicated. It all depends. I mean, if you're not following the district's protocols, then yeah, there's a chance that they couldn't accept it. I've had meetings where school districts have said flat out no. And so what I tend to do is remind everybody that this is this purchase of an independent evaluation wasn't to supersede anybody, but the reality is it's more information for the team to make an informed decision, that this is a child's future and that having as much data as humanly possible to present to the group of people is only going to be is a good thing. So I try to keep it as a positive instead of a negative, like, aha, we caught you guys. We told you he was dyslexic. And I try to take that approach that you get more bees with honey than you do with vinegar. So use it as a tool of resource, not as a sword, I guess, if you will.
Part of it to think about as well is that once they review the neuropsych, they do have the right to do their own evaluation. So if the student has not been evaluated by the district, oftentimes they will at that point request that they be allowed to do their own evaluation, which is their right, and that's perfectly fine. I don't typically find that the school district's evaluation was very different from the neuropsych. They usually they line up pretty well. So if we move on to the next one, New Hampshire does have a dyslexia law. Most states at this point, I believe, do. Some of them have a pretty robust screening and tracking. Others, it's pretty simple. So they do have a universal screening in New Hampshire that they apparently do for at-risk, for students that are at risk for dyslexia and related disorders. It says the related disorders are described as dysgraphia, dysphagia, phonological processing, and reading fluency. They are required to evaluate all kindergartners and first graders by November 30th. Typically, they have an evidence-based intervention in place to address the student's needs if they find that the student is in need of some sort of specialized instruction. they are required to inform the parents. I'm not quite sure, they probably send a letter. Again, when I talk to parents, they aren't aware that their child was screened. So, I would ask very clearly what it is that they used. Okay, Andrea. So if the child's identified, the next part of the process is the IEP. And for every meeting, they need to give you a 10-day written notice. They need to list the purpose of the meeting, the attendees, the time and the place. It has to be mutually convenient. So if it doesn't work with your schedule, you can make a request for a change. The initial IEP meeting must be held within 30 days of the eligibility agreement. And the IEP must be reviewed at least annually in subsequent years. Again, parents should request a draft IEP be sent to them 5 days before the meeting. I usually find most school districts are pretty compliant with that if you ask. Again, being prepared for your meeting, having your questions written out so that you can remember to ask them is important. And if it is a subsequent IEP, they need to discuss whether or not they met the goals of the IEP that's currently in place. Oftentimes, I find that that's a piece that they really neglect to discuss, because what you get for a response is that they're still working on that IEP and they haven't closed it out yet. So they need to include the present levels of performance for achievement and functional performance. And I always ask that they include all the test scores under each area, that they include the data, the baseline data that they currently have, as well as their observation as to where the child is functioning in each area. The goals need to be measurable, attainable, and results oriented and time bound. And so often what I ask them to write, I ask them to to begin the goal with, like, given one-to-one direct systematic instruction. I always ask that if it's for like reading, decoding, that you want it measured on what the child will be able to independently demonstrate at the end, and that they include how they're going to measure the goal between where the baseline data is and where they hope to achieve by the end of the year, and how they're going to report it to you. Underneath the annual goals, they either have to have benchmarks or short-term instructional objectives. Most of the time for reading, I ask that they put short-term instructional objectives. They are not obligated to put them in if you don't ask for them. Again, as we kind of have been noticing that people are from various parts of the country, I would strongly suggest that you go to your state's website. You'll find that your state regulations are there. As I said, New Hampshire has pretty extensive regulations compared to a lot of other states. I always tell people I have one student that goes out west because his father is a ski patrol instructor, and in that state he has a 3-page IEP, and in New Hampshire he has a 23-page IEP. So it was kind of funny, we go back and forth and they just change it. And it's not that the instruction is a lot different, it's not, but the requirements and the elements that each state requires is different. So they also need to, as the student gets a little older, look at their technology needs. Sometimes you need to ask for that. Sometimes when a student is learning to read and the reading that's going on in the classroom is at a much higher level, they need to have, you know, audio tapes, and some kids also use it for written language. One of the final pieces of the IEP is accommodations. Most kids with dyslexia, I would never allow a modification because you have a student who has an average intellectual ability to begin with. And so they should have accommodations to assist the student within the classroom. When a modification gets put in, that means a reduced curriculum. And a lot of parents aren't aware that they're allowing that. If, you know, I would never allow it for a dyslexic student. Then they need to have a section of the IEP that describes the special education services, the amount of time, how often. I ask that they write if it's one-to-one, if they say it's small group, how many students in the group, is it a pull-out service or an in-class service? And then there's a section for state and district testing accommodations. The IEP also includes extended school year. Some districts tend to discuss that when they're talking about the IEP for the regular school year. Other districts wait until April when they see how the student has done. The last component is placement, and the student must be put in the least restrictive environment that will allow for them to have a free, appropriate public education. So this is the meat of the special education, and it's the part of the regulations that's going to dictate the programming that your child will have. And one of the main pieces of that has really come to light is that the last case that went before the U.S. Supreme Court that was decided a couple of years ago. They had I did listen to the audio tape of it, and there was a big shift to kids with learning disabilities, and they asked a lot of questions. And in the end, what they came out with, and it's an important piece for parents to be aware of, they said that they referenced that goals need to be ambitious and challenging and commensurate with the students' progress that's appropriate in light of the child's circumstances. And in light of the circumstances really means the child's intellectual ability. So if you have a child who has an average IQ, which students with learning disabilities and dyslexia do, they're now really looking at having challenging goals for them that they can that are reasonably calculated for them to make the meaningful progress that they need to make. Sure. And I noticed that Justice Roberts very clearly said, then what you're saying to the parents, school district, is that the child is going to make a set amount of progress, and barring anything that might interfere with that, you have an obligation to show that parent that you did make that progress and that you need to provide them the evidence. So sure. That's an important piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Andrea, what do we have next? Perfect. So IDEA protections and rights and procedures. I think Carol had talked about that, and that there are ways of complaining or having some sort of checks and balances. Mediation obviously is hugely important if there is an impasse, and as well as due process if necessary. Andrea, I know we're getting tight on time, so we're gonna fly. Here are some resources. The Center for Parent Information and Resources. There's a list here. We referenced Rights Law and Special Education books that they've written. They're very parent friendly, full of information. The procedural safeguards are not on here, but they probably should have been. That OSEF memo that I had referenced at the beginning, where dyslexia is specifically written into the specific learning disability section. And so you can click on any of these. These will be available on the NHIDA website. I do want to leave some time for more questions because I've looked at the chat and I see Heidi's been answering away at them, but there's a ton of questions that we want to try to get to. So Heidi, why don't you fire off a few more for us?
Okay, so a couple of questions. How does the timeline, how is it impacted with the COVID and school closures?
That's a great question. I mean, obviously, we're in unprecedented times. We hear it every single day. For me, in here in Massachusetts, most of our schools are between a hybrid model and online learning. So their special education here in Massachusetts, and I'm assuming in some spots in New Hampshire, that most of their school sessions that are in, they pre-plan for their special ed kids to be in classes. Here in Western Massachusetts, I know that they're doing that in a hybrid model. So if you're a student with some receiving specific supports, they're done in the school setting. And then I've read some horror stories where they're not, but I'm assuming Andrea and other people on the board can kind of speak towards New Hampshire.
Well, one of the pieces that's important relative to that is that the federal government did not grant waivers. So school districts are responsible to provide what is in the individual student's IEP in some manner. And I believe most governors have letters. So I think if you go to your state website, if you go to Wright's Law, they have some federal, the federal government has released memos in that regard as well.
Heidi, what is your school district doing? I know that you're working in New Hampshire for a specific school district that I'm not going to name, but what are you guys doing for that?
Yeah, we haven't changed many things with the special education. We bring students in. We have targeted students that come in every day, even though the rest of the district is remote.
Yeah.
And so it's like a careful kind of selection of who comes in and things like that. But I know that we're working hard behind the scenes to meet the needs of these kids.
Yeah, I think that's probably a what everybody is doing is they're taking an assessment of who needs it the most and following. There's no waivers, so the expectation is that services are going to continue. I do want to preface this is going back a few years, but there isn't a lot of research about one-on-one through videos and how kids are going to respond to this. I just saw in the state of Massachusetts, in the eastern part of the state, they just lowered the failing grade to 50%, which was 65% prior. But because the kids are doing so terrible, special ed and non-special ed students, they've decided to lower the bar. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. But I think that's the reality that we're living in today, where we're just not sure what impact this is going to have on our special ed kids.
So I'm looking at the time and I maybe have one more question. Does that sound good?
Sure.
So someone said their district does not use the word dyslexia. Can they insist on that in the IEP?
Yes. I mean, if you look at the federal memo, it's pretty clear. And if you take that with you to the meeting and just get out your eligibility papers, I mean, it says it right in there. So they have to include it. And if you raise it, they will. They don't typically refuse to if you raise it. If you don't, they will leave it out. The other piece is that over the years, I mean, we tried to get them to clarify dyslexia forever. They finally did it in 2015. Prior to that, what we used to put in place of the word dyslexia is language-based learning disability. Sometimes that's their preference and they're more comfortable with it. And so typically if they're willing to include that, I don't get into the back and forth about using the word dyslexia. The main piece is to get the goals and the services that are going to meet your child's needs.
Right, so if you accomplish it, if it is a sticking point that it has to be dyslexia or specific learning disability, I think Carol's right. At the end, the point is services. The outcome is getting your child what they need. And using the word dyslexia, if it's, have gone back and forth. I think at the end of the day, I'd rather have goals being meaningful and using Wilson or Orton Gillingham based terminologies, and getting those services is more important to me than specifically saying dyslexia. There's ways around it, and just use your words, and understanding the characteristics of it will, in sense, it is dyslexia. So any person that's reading it will know.
The other place you can put it is put it under your parent concerns,
Yeah.
right? Because then it's in there and they
Right.
know what's in there.
So I can see that there's
That's a
still a
great
ton of
idea.
questions that are available, and we'll do our best as a panel to try to answer all of those questions for you. So I'm hoping that Brenda or Andrea will be able to get a copy of these, so that we'll all be able to chip away at them and then be able to put them up next week for everybody.
Absolutely. We'll get a copy of all the questions in the chat, and we will put them together with the PowerPoint and the video and answers to the questions. And they should be available in about a week on our website. Great. All right, so we want to thank you everyone for coming tonight to our advocacy Read for Parents. Next time on February 10th, we'll have Dr. Melissa Farrell and Susan Morby, and they will be talking about the IDA fact sheet dyslexia assessment. What is it and how can it help? We will be sending out information about that over the next month or two. And so definitely put that on your calendar and look for it. It'll be coming soon. Once we end this webinar, you will have the opportunity to fill out a survey. So please do that. We'd like to capture as much information as we can so that we can make sure we're meeting your needs as parents. So finally, thank you, Carol and Michael, for this excellent presentation, and for being past presidents of New Hampshire IDA, and for making this happen tonight. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Carolyn, Michael. Great job. Awesome job.
No problem. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Bye.